My business idea turned out to be intriguing and highly profitable. However, since the project's launch, I found myself serving the devil. My town is quite small, with around 20,000 residents, but it's a tourist attraction. Foreigners love to visit us to immerse themselves in the culture, and even locals are eager to explore the old architecture. Unfortunately, I have health problems, and physical labor is contraindicated for me. I took on the role of a guard in a necropolis and started developing a program for an unprecedented form of recreation in our region: quest adventures. One of the city cemeteries is ancient. Famous historical figures rest beneath marble sculptures, and family tombs rise among solitary graves. The area is surrounded by a high fence, despite no one being buried there for a long time. Cleanliness and order are impeccable because the necropolis is on the list of places visited by both domestic and foreign tourists. I made an arrangement with Anatoly, the local tour bureau guide, that during excursions he would share legends of the horrors in our town with tourists. Specifically, tales of how locals avoid the inactive cemetery due to a dreadful curse. However, for those seeking to test their nerves, they can sign up for the quest Buried Alive. He then narrated to tourists the story of a count who was buried alive long ago. Did you know that 150,000 people die every day in the world? And catalepsy, or apparent death, affects 1 in 100,000. In the past, medicine couldn't accurately determine whether a person was dead or not. So, it turns out that someone was buried alive somewhere every day. The summer at that time was unbearably hot. They quickly sang the supposedly deceased count and brought him to the cemetery. The coffin was placed in a marble sarcophagus in the tomb. The aristocrat, in a state of catalepsy, woke up and realized what had happened. He pushed open the lid and started screaming. Unfortunately, that night, the cemetery guard and his drinking buddies were celebrating, having stayed out past midnight. The intoxicated group decided that a vampire had risen from the grave. Armed with shovels, the men removed the sarcophagus lid and beat the count. Without saying a word, they tidied up the tomb and left. And then, one by one, they all died over the next few days. The last to die was the guard, who had confessed to his actions. Since then, ghosts of the innocently killed and gravediggers who didn't receive forgiveness wander the cemetery. And now, anyone interested can step into the shoes of the count. Since the day when the tour guide Anatoly started narrating the tourists about the dreadful curses, a desire to visit our town multiplied several times over. The quest was designed for one person and was quite costly. The idea was full of intrigue. The one who bought the right to lie in the coffin didn't know what would happen to them until the very last moment. The coffin was modern, with small glass windows. Inside, heart-wrenching sounds were transmitted. Moans, screams, the creaking of trees, the howling of wolves, hurricane winds, the cawing of crows. Bloodstains on the glass were marked by twisted fingers. Shadows flickered between the graves. Lights twinkled. The coffin shook and tossed from side to side when ghosts, demons, angels, vampires, and all kinds of creatures approached, starting a brawl for the fresh soul. Then the coffin was placed in the tomb. The one rising from the bed of death was met by a black monk and an executioner. They offered a choice: execution to enter heaven, or selling the soul to the devil. In the latter case, life continued. Informed about the outcome, players chose to serve the darkness. As soon as the signature appeared on the contract, All the candles went out, and a terrifying rumble ensued. Within seconds, the quest participant found themselves alone, locked in a tomb, facing a blood-soaked coffin covered in white feathers. Usually, at this point, the player's nerves couldn't handle it, and the quest ended. To finish, the buried person had to call for help by uttering a code phrase. Specially hired actors took care of everything. They enthusiastically crafted dialogues and perfected costumes, makeup, props, and gestures. Photography and videography were prohibited, and only word of mouth spread details about the coolest quest within 1,000 kilometers. The game was tremendously successful. After another game, already in the early morning, someone knocked on my door. I shouted, "Come in." A person in camouflage and a balaclava entered the office. I couldn't identify who was in front of me. The person didn't remove their headgear, increasingly unnerving me. He threw a chubby envelope on the table and said, "Today, there will be a woman in the quest. She's already signed up. She has a severe allergy to dust, fluff, and fur. Make sure there's plenty of this dirt in the coffin. Let your carrier shake the coffin harder and scream louder so she can't be heard. The main thing is, when you open the coffin, call the doctors and confirm her death. Nothing will happen to you. You don't know about her condition. All the risks fall on the player. If you refuse, warn the woman or report to the police." I had no choice, and I did everything as this person instructed. Over the following year, accidents occurred 2 more times. One man's heart stopped. A few months later, another, emerging from the coffin, slipped on the foxblood, hit his head on the sarcophagus, and died. Strangely, this only increased the demand for the quest. People craved intense sensations, and death became a powerful magnet. Money flowed like a river. I received separate sums for those who perished before the game. Of course, my colleagues knew nothing about it. I dreamed of accumulating enough and escaping to a place where no one knew me, where I could forget this nightmare. After receiving the 4th order, I personally carried the coffin. When the player signed the contract with the devil and remained alone, I wanted to return to the condemned. It was Nikolai. We once studied together. He was thrashing inside the enclosure, going crazy. He had autophobia, a fear of being alone. By the rules, a player couldn't be released until they uttered the code phrase. He couldn't die, but he could suffer a psychological trauma. The order was precisely for that. The relatives dreamt of declaring Nikolai incapacitated. I wanted to open the secret door, but it wouldn't budge. Suddenly, an actor, the Black Monk, appeared in front of me. He said, "Everyone lying in the coffin, alive summons the devil. You don't have to suffer for them. They're already insane, and their souls are dead. And you've become a part of hell. You signed a contract without reading it when you agreed to the first death." I screamed, pulled the hood off the monk, but there was no one inside the attire. I visit Nikolai at the asylum. He smiles at me and says the same thing every time. "I'm waiting for you. I'm waiting for you. I'm waiting for you." And I think, not for long. Soon I'll be sitting with you in the same room. Only hardly anyone will come to visit me.